I used to really hate Mega Man 9, to the point where, when 10 came out, I didn't even bother to pick it up, despite Mega Man being hands down my favorite franchise out there. I think I managed to make it to the Wily stages, and I vaguely remember refighting that Flower sub-boss, but I never actually cleared this one. Until the Legacy Collection came out and I hammered through the whole classic series again. Not only did I beat it, but when it came time to rank all the classic titles, I even put this one up quite high, though you'll have to watch that video to find out where. So what made me hate 9 and what flipped that on its head, to make this game one of my favorites? Pretty sure I can summarize everything pretty well, so let's give the whole thing a look. I'm Wes, the Explosion, and these are my very complicated thoughts on a game I have a very complicated history with. Let's knock the plot out first, which I will be covering in full, so no spoiler free this time. Timestamps down below if you need to skip. So anyway, a bunch of robots start going wild, wrecking things up, and people soon start to notice that they're all RMs made by Dr. Light. Wily soon appears to claim that Light had world domination plans all along and even invited him to join him, but being the upstanding citizen he is, he declined. He then vows to create his own robots to stop the current threat and just asks people to crowdfund their creation by wiring him money. And just in case you think this is the most obvious Wily plot in the series, people start calling Dr. Light to complain, and he even gets arrested. The people of this world are not smart. Then again, the callers could be in the minority, and the robot that arrests him turns out to be fake, so maybe it's not fair to say that Mega Man comes from a world of idiots. Then again, I don't recall anyone offering any helpful guesses when Mr. X showed up, so maybe cunning and the ability to make awesome robots are very different skill sets, and this world only got one of them. Anyway, bit by bit, it's revealed that robots have expiration dates and are scrapped when they reach them, and that the 8 robot masters were nearing theirs. Dr. Wily appeared just before the due date to rail against their fate and convinced them to let him help them so that they could still perform their functions. This kinda raises some questions, like why some older robots are still around, and why robots are okay just getting killed when their time is up, the promise of still being useful being more of a motivator than self-preservation. It certainly adds credence to the claim that robot masters lack true sentience. Anyway, Wily convinces them, and rather than just repair, upgrade, override the expiration date, or whatever the heck the deal was, he reprograms them to be evil to frame Dr. Light. The whole situation kinda seems like Wily is right, but for the wrong reasons. These robot masters all have some impressive skills, so to say that they've outlived their usefulness sounds like a joke, and just killing them all because of an arbitrary calendar date seems really cruel. When Wily makes his speech about how they still have a right to live, I wind up agreeing with him, though him using this to launch into his latest plot does put a damper on things. The end credits show off the 8 robot masters still hanging around, so it seems that their fate was reconsidered. While it seems a little weird to lift the execution date for a group that just tried to take over the world, maybe the cruelty of how robots were treated was reevaluated and even seen as the cause for what just happened. Either way, it's a happy ending for everyone not named Albert. While still simple, the plot is a bit more than what we typically get in an NES game, and I appreciate it, even if it is completely predictable. Mega Man's back and he's pretty much the same. He can jump and shoot, and he has the rush coil and jet, working as they typically do, but they did get rid of the charge shot. While that's a little disappointing, some people did think that it made the game too easy, and I kinda like both the charge and Clink, so I don't mind too much. Otherwise, he's pretty much exactly the same and... Wait. Why can't I get this power up? I should be able to just slide right in between these pipes and... Okay, one of the big reasons why I originally hated this one, they got rid of the damn slide. This did a lot to add to Mega Man's maneuverability and make the second-to-second gameplay feel dynamic, so not having it here really hurts. Mega Man's been reverted back to how he worked in the second game, so no charge and no slide, and while I'll have a bit to say about this later, I guess for right now I'll just say that I really missed that second option, but I guess we should just be thankful that they let us keep Rush. In addition to Rock, you also get some blues, you being able to play through the game as DLN00 in a special mode. He can charge his shots and slide as well, so it's hard not to feel a little jealous, as well as block some things with his shield. He also takes double damage and double knockback, so he's much easier to kill. While it's probably a pretty fair trade-off, I personally prefer Mega Man. I end up using the special weapon so much that not having a charge shot is practically a non-issue after a stage or two, and being able to tank more hits tends to benefit me more than being able to dodge a bit more easily. Plus, while a lot of my deaths in these games come from insta-kills, that extra knockback makes me a lot more susceptible to them, so I'm still dying more. I've beaten the game normally many times and on hard twice, but I still have not beaten it with Proto Man. Then, taken from 7 oddly enough, is the shop. You can buy extra lives, E-tanks to refill health, mystery tanks to refill everything, Eddie summons, ways to survive insta-kills, a power-up to halve the damage you take for one stage, the energy balancer to refill ammo. Heck, there's even 2 novelty buys, one changing Roll's dress and another to remove Mega Man's helmet, though you do take double damage with that one. If you play through the game without a lot of game overs, you'll probably find enough bolts for a few things, but if you're losing constantly, you can build up a nice stash and use them to buy power-ups to help you through whatever you're having trouble with. Not a bad system, though if you're Proto Man, you'll have to go without, since he ran away from home. The weapons in this one are incredible, maybe the best in the series. Not one is just a simple ammo swap, changing your lemons to a fireball or something, but being otherwise the same. They all have special functions. Black hole bombs get fired out and you can affect their forward trajectory, making the shot arch up or down. Hit the fire button again when it's where you want it, and the black hole will open up, sucking in any nearby enemies and being a one-hit kill on pretty much anything that isn't a sub or stage boss. Not the best ammo count, though that's to be expected with the kind of firepower it has. Jewel Satellite is your shield weapon. 4 gems circling you. You can fire it off, but I never do because keeping it up is so much more helpful. It can reflect or block most projectiles, kill most enemies, and does not go away until either you deactivate it, shoot it, or collide with an enemy that can tank a hit from it. It is really good, and if you're ever worried about getting sucker punched, this is the way to go. Plug balls drop to the ground, then crawl along it until it hits an enemy or goes off screen. While not my most used weapon, I do sometimes break it out to hit enemies on a different level than me. No camping ledges. Tornado Blow is an AoE, hitting the whole screen. It carries small enemies off screen, so not great at farming power-ups, but does excel at getting you some space. It can also raise some platforms up. With that spread though, you don't get many uses, I believe only 4. Magma Bazooka fires out 3 shots, 2 diagonally, 1 straight ahead. It's good for coverage, though the big appeal is that you can charge it up for a bigger and stronger shot, though it will eat up more energy to do so. Hornet Chaser might be my favorite here, though Black Hole Bomb does rival it. It homes in on enemies and power-ups, bringing the latter back to you. And hey, if it takes a baddie out and they drop something, it'll retrieve that for you too, at no additional charge. Can't use them for tanks though. It has good ammo count and, while not the strongest, it can still take out most smaller enemies with a hit, maybe 2, so the only main complaint I have is that they sometimes don't go after exactly the target I want. Laser Trident is probably the most basic weapon, it being the closest to just your regular shot but different sprite and color scheme. They travel straight ahead, but what sets it apart is that it hits fairly hard, breaks certain blocks, and can even pierce guards of enemies that use shields. Well, other than Mets for some reason. It's gotten me out of a lot of tough situations. Finally, there's the Concrete Shot, which plops out a block. It can freeze some enemies and obstacles, as well as create a foothold if it collides with a floor or wall. It crumbles fast, so move quickly. I believe that's all 8, and with their extra utility, you have an arsenal that's almost as good as the Metal Blade. Perhaps the closest anyone's ever gotten. I also think the stages in this one are pretty good. Each one has a ton thrown in, like Tornado Man, where you start out climbing, dealing with a few enemies along the way. Then you get these spinny magnet panels. Then you have to run across slippery ice floors while hopping around baddies. Then you have to deal with rain afflicting your forward momentum and clouds serving as secret platforms. I typically hate things like wind in platformers, but here it kinda works. I'd say just about every stage is like this, giving you something new to deal with every few screens, then maybe remixing or combining stuff later on as well. I'd say the most standard stage is Concrete Man's, which has you deal with flying enemies that drop rocks, enemies that pop up from pits, a trio of sub-bosses, floors with fake panels to suss out, and platforms that shoot either up or down after you jump on them. The variety's still there, but most of these elements have been done in earlier games, which makes the stage feel a bit more like an homage, and you get a little bit of that in Splash Woman's level as well, where you have to fall in between spiked walls while submerged, and there being a section where you have to hop between slowly ascending bubbles that feels ripped right from Wave Man's level. All of them have fun gimmicks, 2 of my favorites being the swingy platforms in Jewel Man's stage, and maybe my favorite level of any classic game, Galaxy Man's, where you have these warp blocks that send you falling into one, only to trampoline out of another, with you needing to map out which connects to which as you go. To give some quick praise to the others, Magma Man drops flows of lava that function largely like the garbage crushers in previous games, but much more colorful and with the bonus of being able to be frozen by concrete shots. Plugman has some really good disappearing block sections, and the grayscale copies of Mega Man that get printed out and also die to spikes are neat. And I like the flower pot enemies in Hornet Man's stage, as well as the extending platforms. I only have two real complaints with the standard stages. First, the sub-bosses are kinda boring. A rock with the face really doesn't get me excited, and the elephants in the dam level just seem random and are kind of annoying. The flower ain't bad with its whack-a-mole style fight, complete with clock hand, though googly eyes on a plant isn't exactly the most creative design. The dragon with fireballs making up its body that can be blown off to reveal bones underneath is the only one that really grabs me. Luckily, we have the main bosses to make up for things, but I'm getting ahead of myself. My second issue is just how much harder Jewel Man's stage is compared to pretty much every other one. Maybe not everyone feels this way, but my chat did say that it was a noob killer, so it's not just me. While I love the swingy platforms, having to manage your momentum and jump around spikes is really cruel. I've referenced this one screen in particular before, since it's both one of the trickiest maneuvers to pull off in the game and also one of the most satisfying. Wouldn't recommend trying this one first. The Wily stages are when things start getting really hard though, tossing stronger enemies your way, remixing some of the trickier stage gimmicks, and testing both your fine motor skills and weapon knowledge. There's a bunch of sections that require short hops, careful spacing, and doing stuff like breaking blocks with the laser trident or using the jewel satellite to farm ammo refills. The last level even hits you with something new, lasers that you have to block by tossing concrete on top of them or tanking a hit. While they're all challenging and manage to keep me on edge, I think the part that really gets me is the anti-gravity chambers, where you slowly rise upward, avoiding spikes and mini-devils in the process. You can use your buster to manipulate your momentum and go from one side of the screen to the other, which is brilliant. My beef comes with the weird heli enemies that clamp onto your head, that will fly down seemingly at random to launch you into the spikes. Despite first impressions though, their locations are set, so memorizing where one will appear is key. Pretty frustrating at first though. Still, there's a lot of cool stuff packed in, and the fun bits should more than make up for the curse-inducing ones. Should. In addition to that, there's also a special stage, originally DLC. It's pretty long and has all of the sub-bosses included, as well as a fortress boss on top of a new RM, Fake Man. It's a mashup of skill and memorizing where certain enemies are going to pop in, and since you can only play it under time attack, you get no extra lives, so you have to do it all in one. Still, since it isn't a part of the main rotation and is the sort of thing that you should only play after clearing the main game, I can't get too mad at it, and when you manage to clear it, it feels really good. The last extra is Endless Attack, where you battle through as many sets of screens as you can, send your way in a random order, and see how far you can get. From what I've seen, these are completely new, just not recycled areas from the main game. Different sets test different skills, some requiring platforming, some focusing on enemies, some on special environments, some having quite a few insta-deaths, so whether you have a good run or not could really depend on how well your role matches your playstyle. You also get a boss after 50 screens. It's a good test of skill, I've had some fun with it, and my record is 53 in case you're wondering. I'd say the bosses have top tier designs. Concrete Man, like his level, seems to be a way to pay tribute to past games, him looking very similar to Guts Man. Tornado Man bears a resemblance to Harpooya, reminding you that this is an Inti Creates game. Magma Man sporting that Airman body type. Plug Man looks a little silly, but I don't hate it. And Jewel Man looks pretty flamboyant, and I can respect the guy who wears pink. Of special note is Splash Woman, our first female robot master unless we count Roll. She has a DLN designation, so I think she counts, even if the only robot she's master over are household appliances. Anyway, it makes sense for them to do a girl for a mermaid boss, and while I don't hate the male Atlantean-looking version, I prefer the one they ended up going with. Conversely, I kinda wish that they would have stuck with Honey Woman, whose cute design I like even more than Splash Woman's. Still, Hornet Man's pretty neat, opening up those hexagonal hatches to fire out Hornet Chasers, and a friend of mine even cosplayed him once. Still would love to see the two drop characters come back as a bonus or even full bosses though, since they both look great. And Galaxy Man is easily my favorite. His UFO design is fun, and I love how he can fold into himself. Each boss is well thought out, and the sprites do a good job of getting them across. As for the boss fights, each seem well matched to their weaknesses. You can logic out a lot of them, and when you use them, they do more than just extra damage, giving you an extra advantage. Like the laser trident destroying Concrete Man's blocks, or the Hornet Chasers chasing down Splash Woman, even when she's at the top of the screen. It's in the name. If you don't have the right weapon though, your normal shots do minimal damage to all of them but Splash Woman, who takes 2 ticks of health from a shot, so I guess that's who you're supposed to go after first. Still, I tend to go after Galaxy Man immediately, then maybe Magma Man with an E-Tank, though while I skip around a little bit, I'd recommend keeping the Buster only to a minimum. 5 out of the 8 have special rooms, Magma, Plug, and Hornet having different floor elevations, Tornado Man having a spiked ceiling, and Splash Woman fighting you underwater. The fights tend to be pretty fun, each RM having a few attacks they can throw your way, and figuring out the best way to use their weakness being part of the charm. A few though, I have what I'll refer to as the big eye problem, me having trouble dodging them due to not knowing whether they'll jump big or short. Magma Man being the worst of these for me, and Concrete Man can also be a complete hit or miss. Him either keeping close and me getting smacked around, or him just fighting stupid and me not taking a hit. Still, with the weakness, you can outdamage each, so I never have too much room for complaint. For the Fortress bosses though, I hate the first one, the Spike Pushers. It's kind of a reverse tug of war, you pushing the spike balls back and forth at each other. Kill one and another will take its place. Sometimes a head with 2 horns will pop up, which are a bit more aggressive. All of them can take pot shots at you directly when they're feeling safe. I find the fight tedious, the spike balls are insta-kills, your room to maneuver narrow, and sometimes, when you think you've taken a row down, one will just randomly pop back in. This one's kind of a low point for me. Then there's the shark sub, or maybe it's just an airship and I'm letting the shark theme throw me off, but it has 3 sections, each with their own health bar to win. Wait a second, this isn't Mega Man Zero. 1 bar per boss, please. Joking aside, back is a missile hatch that you need to hit when it fires out more projectiles. The middle is 2 pods that drop mini sharks with spikes in the middle, so you need to jump carefully, and the front fires lasers from its mouth. No part is too hard, it's just a matter of managing your resources, and each takes advantage of your weapons, having well thought out weaknesses. The Twin Devils I love. 2 blobs swap parts back and forth, like a 2-sided yellow devil, but are predictable enough that they might just be a bit easier than the original. The hardest part might just be keeping an eye out for when it passes its core over, since this is what you have to hit, but if you use the black hole bomb, you hardly need to aim. Wily's interesting this time, having a weird floating dino mech. You volley eggs back and forth, it exploding on the 3rd return. It's unique, though you have to be careful to bounce it back into the head and not the feet. Part 2 moves fast and takes up a good bit of space. You kinda just have to hang back, waiting for your chance to attack, since getting too aggressive will likely see the mech body checking you. Last part is a dumbed down Wily capsule, it throwing out 4 energy balls that fly your way but aren't too hard to dodge, and lines of sparks that are hard to dodge but do little damage. The main issue is that its weakness is the plug ball, which you need to be right up against it to use. And the capsule will often be out of range. Swapping between this when he's low and Hornet Chaser when he's up high is how I like to do things. While the latter only does a tick of damage, it's not nothing. The special stage boss is Fake Man, an imitation police officer bot. He runs and jumps around, firing shots at you, though you can bounce them back with a Jewel satellite. It's a pretty okay fight, one I neither love or hate. While I think the spike pushers and the 3-stage Wily machines are pretty annoying, for everything else, I have a good time fighting. Like the weapons, I consider this one of the better classic rosters. Both the music and graphics are doing this thing where they're aping the style of the NES games, but are just a bit more complex than what that system could pull off. While it still uses pixels, the sprites are just a bit more detailed and the music just a tad more complex than past OSTs. Or at least it seems that way to me. I've read that they used an 8-bit graphic engine, so maybe it could have run on the Nintendo and the slight difference is all just in my head. Or maybe years of experience allowed them to push things just a bit further than they did back then. With the graphics in particular, if you can get to the credits, there's 8 scenes, each with one of the new Robot Masters and a recurring character that are just straight up works of art. As for the individual tracks, they're really good. Galaxy Man has a weird, fun energy to his theme, Tornado Man's feels like it's being tossed around by a storm, and Splash Woman certainly feels nautical. and it's no surprise that some of the Wily stage themes, Were the Robots and Flash in the Dark, made it into Smash. Speaking of, things get really good when you start looking into remixes and arrangements, one in particular probably being the reason why I find Hornet Dance to be so sultry and flirty. Look up Smooth as Honey if you get the chance. Point is, with as long as it's been between games and with different people working on it, you might expect this OST to be a bit lacking, but no, it totally knocks it out of the park. I think 9 is probably the hardest of the mainline classic games. Forget 1's jank, 3's sometimes punishing nature, 11's new systems to juggle, though 7's Wily capsule makes that entry a contender. Still, for just moment-to-moment stuff, 9 really puts you through your paces. There is a lot to contend with. There's quite a few spots where you can just die with little to no warning because you don't know where enemies are going to appear. Some spots seem designed to just screw you over, like the extending then retracting platforms where an enemy can just zoom into you, stun you for just long enough for the platform to shrink, you losing your iframes as you touch down to the spikes below, or making you use up all your tornado blow to get through a stage right before a sub-boss that gets destroyed by it. There's a lot of surprise enemy pop-ins that can combo into insta-kill, and even some mets disguised as extra lives. They're stingy with power-ups, the last stage with the boss rush having only 4 small weapon refills when you spawn in, and speaking of, here you have to do all 8 bosses, then a 3-stage Wily fight. All a single stage. And a lot of the levels just have some pretty challenging sections without any of the extra bullcrap I just mentioned, from the tricky but doable spinning magnet platforms that you can totally skip with Rush Jet, to the swingy platforms in Jewel Man stage where you not only have to manage your momentum, but also make some pretty tight jumps around spikes. Add into that the omission of the slide, really cutting down on your movement, paired with several situations where it just feels like it was designed with the slide in mind, most notably some boss attacks, and this can be a really frustrating game. With their work on the Mega Man Zero series, it certainly does feel like Inti Creates fetishizes difficulty, as well as Mega Man 2 with all they took out. Really surprised they let us have an item shop here. This difficulty was a big reason why I hated 9 on my first outing. The game expects some pretty crazy things from you at points, some levels requiring memorization to avoid cheap deaths. They take away some core mechanics that have been around for more games than not due to them idolizing an entry that I thought of as greatly overrated, and it just felt like they were making the game as hard as they remembered them being as kids, as opposed to how hard they actually were. And this title was just not for me. Coming back to it years later though, things were a lot different. I was no longer just jumping right in after years of no games, instead playing this after 8 other entries in the series. I had slowly learned to use the special weapons as more than just boss weaknesses. There were checkpoints saved so that I could actually learn the game, rather than just eat dirt when a Heliclaw popped down out of nowhere and launched me into some spikes. As I was able to pick things up at my own pace with previously re-honed skills backing me up, I found myself having fun with all the cool mechanics included in the levels, figuring out the best ways to make use of the awesome weapons, and appreciating all the cool bosses. To bring it back around, the game is hard and I wouldn't recommend it to anyone who hasn't beaten at least the 6 NES games, and even then, with some of the bullcrap the game will throw your way, there's a fair chance you'll have a bad time until you learn the ins and outs. When you're able to get to the point where you're not constantly viewing the sides of the screen with suspicion though, it becomes an absolute blast to play, and one of my favorites to revisit. Funnily enough, I recently tried out Hero Mode, this game's higher difficulty setting, and had a similar experience. Everything works exactly the same, you take and deal the same damage. What's different is the enemy placement, which there tend to be more of now and in harder to deal with spots, with just a few light changes to some of the obstacles as well, such as the warp boxes. I love this as a difficulty mode, by the way. First time though, I was constantly using checkpoint saves and hating every minute of it. Even the bosses seemed to give me more trouble, though I was probably just psyching myself out. Then, after the practice round to make sure I could do it, I played through again on stream and had a much better time. Really only Jewel Man stage and the Wily one with the anti-grab making me curse my fate. While I still used checkpoints, I rarely reloaded, and though I've been warned off superhero mode, I could see myself start defaulting to hero when it comes up in rotation. My point is, the same thing happened as my initial attempts, me starting out fuming before acclimating and learning to have fun with it. While it definitely has a learning curve, Mega Man 9 can be very rewarding if you can just get through that first clear. So there you go. While I think Mega Man 9's a fantastic game, it was definitely an acquired taste for me. While just picking up a game and immediately loving it should probably be the ideal, I think there's something really special when you go from hate to the other extreme. It somehow adds to my appreciation. I wonder if there's some sort of weird psychological effect to explain that. Anyway, what are your thoughts? Is this a good one, a bad one? Is it too hard, too easy? And can you tell that this was made over a decade after the NES games by a largely different team? Inti Creates titles certainly have an odd effect on me of wanting to curse them while simultaneously not being able to get enough. All that said, thanks for watching, maybe consider subscribing if you're into Mega Man, and perhaps I'll see you next week. For everlasting peace.